The airport security line was tense, buzzing with impatient travelers and the shrill beeps of scanners. Smoke swirled from a small trash can, sharp and acrid, but nobody noticed, except her. She clutched her ID, a little worn at the edges, and stepped forward. That's when it happened. The pilot, mid-30s, smug and dismissive, grabbed her ID, his fingers brushing hers with a mocking sneer. "We don't need this," he snapped. Before she could react, he flicked a lighter and burned the corner of her ID, letting it curl and blacken. The acrid smell hit her nose. Heat, humiliation, shock, every emotion collided. Around her the crowd murmured, uneasy but frozen, watching as she froze. Her heart raced. Anger surged, but fear whispered louder. What could she do? Who would believe her against a uniformed pilot in front of dozens of onlookers? Then, almost instinctively, she reached into her pocket. A badge glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights. FBI. The letters shone with authority. Unmistakable. The pilot's smirk faltered, his color draining as the room fell into stunned silence. But this was only the beginning. The moment the pilot's lighter scorched her ID, her life felt as if it had been condensed into a single, unbearable second. Her name was Monique Harper, 34, a federal agent whose calm exterior often fooled everyone she met. But beneath it, she carried the weight of decades of subtle injustices, microaggressions, and outright discrimination. Even in her early 20s, she had learned the painful truth. Competence didn't always shield black professionals from contempt or disbelief. Her morning had begun like any other. The sunlight spilled through her apartment window, golden but fleeting, as she grabbed her bag and double-checked her badge. She'd been flying into Atlanta on a routine assignment, a meeting with a key informant about a cross-state fraud ring. Nothing in her mind suggested that boarding a commercial flight would become an ordeal of humiliation. At the airport, she noticed the pilot first. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a crisp uniform and a smirk that seemed permanently etched into his face. Something in his eyes flicked over her, not curiosity but dismissal. The line moved slowly. Families jostled, luggage wheels screeched, and security personnel barked instructions that fell into a blurry white noise. Monique, standing with practiced patience, felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the anxiety that came not from flying, but from knowing she would have to assert herself again. Her phone buzzed, a text from her colleague, Agent Ramirez, checking. "Is everything okay?" she typed back. "All good, just the usual airport circus." Her thoughts drifted to her childhood in Birmingham, Alabama, where she had learned resilience in the face of people who judged her before she spoke. The irony of standing in a bustling terminal, professionally trained and armed with authority, yet still anticipating prejudice, was not lost on her. The pilot's hand snatched her ID before she could react. "We don't need this," he said, voice sharp. She froze, the heat from the lighter brushing her fingertips and the smell of burning plastic clawed at her senses. Around her, travelers shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. Her stomach churned, with the familiar cocktail of fear and indignation. "Why do they always assume I don't belong?" she thought, gripping the charred remains of her ID. The scene could have ended there, humiliating but brief. But Monique had been trained for high stakes. Confrontations, just not the kind that happened in fluorescent-lit terminals. She drew her badge. The metallic glint caught the harsh overhead lights. FBI. 3 letters that carried weight, power, and authority, but also envy and disbelief when held by someone like her. The pilot's smirk faded. Color drained from his face. The crowd leaned in, eyes wide, the terminal momentarily silent. After the initial shock, Monique was escorted to a quiet corner of the airport. There, she met Agent Ramirez, a tall, wiry man whose calm demeanor often served as the emotional counterbalance to her intensity. "You okay?" he asked, voice low but concerned. She exhaled sharply. "I'll be fine. Once I figure out how to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Her mind already raced with possibilities. Reporting him could backfire. Airlines often protected their pilots, and yet, letting it go felt impossible. The humiliation wasn't just hers. It represented every subtle dismissal she had endured over her career. Over the next few days, Monique's life unfolded in parallel worlds. By day, she worked complex cases involving interstate crime, financial fraud, and clandestine operations. By night, she wrestled with her anger, crafting a plan that was as much about accountability as it was about personal vindication. Her apartment, usually a sanctuary, became a command center of research, phone calls, and whispered strategies. She confided in two trusted colleagues, Agent Ramirez and Dr. Lila Freeman, a psychologist who had helped Monique process years of career-related trauma. Ramirez, ever the strategist, suggested documenting everything meticulously, gathering witnesses and using the pilot's arrogance against him. Lila emphasized emotional readiness. This confrontation would be public and potentially explosive. As Monique worked, small humiliations haunted her. Emails from airline officials dismissing complaints as misunderstandings, colleagues brushing off her story with polite concern, and even passengers who later recounted seeing the incident but hesitated to speak up. Each setback stoked a mix of despair and resolve. She also revisited the human side of her story. Her mother had worked 2 jobs, instilling in her the belief that integrity and intelligence would always shine, even if the world tried to dim them. Her younger brother, Malik, had faced constant racial profiling in school. Monique had promised him she would fight not just for herself, but for people like him. These memories fueled her late-night planning sessions, a quiet but fierce determination that refused to be silenced. By the end of the week, Monique had constructed a careful plan. She would confront the pilot, not in the heat of a terminal crowd, but where it could not be ignored, through official channels, backed by irrefutable evidence and a small but growing network of allies. Each conversation, each document, each witness statement was a brick in the foundation of accountability. Yet even with preparation, the stakes remained high. Would the airline protect its employee? Would the pilot recognize the magnitude of her authority before it escalated further? Could she maintain composure under the scrutiny of the public eye, where one misstep might turn the narrative against her? Every night as she stared at the glowing cityscape from her apartment window, Monique's thoughts echoed in a single repeated question. If this was allowed to slide, what message would it send? The tension built, not only in the professional stakes but in the personal. Her identity, her integrity, her very sense of justice hanging in the balance. And somewhere deep inside, a seed of anticipation grew. Something was about to change. Something irreversible. Because for Monique Harper, the charred ID was not the end, it was a signal. And she would not rest until the world recognized the truth. Mini cliffhanger to end setup. As she looked over her carefully laid plans one final time, a message pinged on her phone from an unknown number. I know what happened. Meet me tomorrow. Alone. Her heart skipped. Who could it be? Friend or foe? And how much danger was she really in? Night had fallen over Atlanta, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, indifferent to the storm brewing in Monique Harper's mind. The airport incident had become more than a moment of humiliation. It was now a spark, igniting a carefully suppressed anger that demanded action. She sat at her apartment desk, papers scattered like a battlefield. Her laptop opened to airline regulations, witness statements, and federal procedures. Agent Ramirez leaned against the doorway, coffee in hand, eyebrows furrowed. "You sure you want to do this by the book? You could go public, make a scene." Monique shook her head, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. "No, I need leverage, evidence, witnesses, and I need to hit where it hurts, credibility. A scene might feel satisfying, but it won't guarantee change." Ramirez nodded, impressed despite himself. "You've always been meticulous. But this guy, he's arrogant. He's not used to being challenged." She smiled faintly. "Then he's about to learn." The planning session stretched deep into the night. Monique documented every detail: the pilot's actions, the scorched ID, the passengers who had witnessed the event, and even the timing of flights to establish a timeline. Each discovery was logged meticulously, her pen scratching across paper like a drumbeat of justice. Yet tension seeped into every corner of her apartment. Every unfamiliar noise, a car door slamming, a siren wailing, made her heart race. The weight of potential backlash pressed down. What if the airline retaliated? What if the pilot tried to discredit her? Every worst-case scenario ran like a film in her mind, and with it, a question that refused to leave. Can I really win this fight? Then came the unexpected text. "Meet me tomorrow alone." Her pulse quickened. Ramirez leaned closer. "You shouldn't go alone." "I know," she whispered, eyes fixed on the message. "But I have to know who it is. It could be the breakthrough we need, or the trap that ends everything." The next morning, Monique arrived at a quiet cafe, a neutral space far from the scrutiny of terminals or offices. A man in his 40s, with sharp eyes and an air of cautious authority, slid into the seat across from her. "I'm Thomas Lane," he said softly, glancing around. "I was on your flight. I saw what the pilot did, and I have something you'll need." Monique leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Go on." He handed her a small flash drive. "Security cameras." He tried to act casual, but the cameras caught the moment. "You'll see everything, clear as day." Monique's heart thumped. Proof. Real, undeniable proof. Ramirez's earlier warnings echoed faintly. Evidence is your shield, but people can still lie, manipulate, or retaliate. Back in her apartment, she plugged in the drive. Footage of the incident played on her screen. The pilot flicking the lighter, the charred ID, the hesitation of the passengers, all frozen in time. Monique's lips pressed into a thin line. This was her moment. But the fight was only beginning. Over the following days, Monique assembled her team. Ramirez coordinated witness interviews, Dr. Lila Freeman provided emotional coaching, and Thomas Lane became her quiet liaison in the airline's internal network. Every evening, the apartment transformed into a war room. Papers and laptops strewn across the table like a battle map. They debated strategy. Should they confront the pilot directly first, or go through the airline chain of command? Each option carried risk. A confrontation might provoke immediate retaliation. A bureaucratic approach could drag on endlessly, allowing public opinion to fade. "Timing is everything," Monique said, voice steady but intense. "We hit when attention is focused. Social media, press coverage, and regulatory oversight. If we act too soon or too late, he'll wriggle free." Ramirez rubbed his chin. "And if he knows we're coming, he could cover his tracks, intimidate witnesses, or worse." Monique's fingers drummed the table. "That's why we creep. Every call, email, and meeting must be precise and untraceable where possible. One misstep and the narrative could flip against us." Amid the planning, the emotional toll became visible. Monique often found herself staring out the window for long minutes, replaying the pilot's smirk, the burning ID, the humiliation. Fury alternated with doubt, hope with fear. She slept little. Her mind always several steps ahead, imagining scenarios, preparing responses, rehearsing confrontations. One night, while reviewing witness statements, she froze. A passenger claimed the pilot had a history previous. Incidents of discrimination and aggressive behavior. But all had been quietly settled. No formal record. "This isn't just about me," she whispered to Ramirez, who nodded gravely. It's systemic. If we let this slide, it reinforces the same patterns, the same biases. I can't ignore that. Each step carried suspense. Would witnesses cooperate fully? Could the airline be pressured into accountability? And lurking beneath every plan was the unpredictable human factor, the pilot himself. Monique's late-night rehearsals were almost ritualistic. She stood in front of a mirror, badge in hand, practicing her composure, her words, her gaze. The reflection staring back was fierce, commanding. Yet beneath the steel was a flicker of vulnerability. A woman who had faced systemic injustice all her life, now channeling it into a singular mission. Mini cliffhanger moment. Then, a chilling email landed in her inbox. No subject, no signature. Just a line. Stop this or you'll regret it. Her hand froze over the mouse. Ramirez leaned in, eyes wide. Looks like he knows we're on to him. Monique swallowed hard. The risk had escalated. The pilot was aware, and his next move was unpredictable. But retreat was not an option. Not after every humiliation, every subtle insult, every moment she had been made to feel smaller than she was. The weeks that followed blurred into a tense, calculated rhythm. Monique, Ramirez, Dr. Freeman, and Thomas Lane worked tirelessly. Each day brought minor victories. Witnesses agreeing to testify, small airline admissions, security footage verification. But the stress and fear never left. Then came the perfect storm. A significant flight schedule change forced the pilot into a public pre-flight event, surrounded by press and passengers. It was the opportunity they had been waiting for, an undeniable, unavoidable moment for truth to emerge. But standing at the edge of the airport ramp, Monique felt the weight of every injustice she had endured. The crowd, the cameras, the pilot's arrogance, it all coalesced into one heartbeat. One choice. One moment that would define the next chapter of her life. And as she stepped forward, she couldn't shake the shadow of doubt whispering in the back of her mind. Will this end in vindication? Or public humiliation? The airport buzzed with the usual chaos. Rolling luggage, intercom announcements, passengers hustling to gates. But Monique Harper felt as if she were moving through a different dimension, one where every step carried weight, every glance held meaning. Today was the day. Every piece of evidence, every interview, every painstakingly rehearsed moment had led here. She arrived at the pre-flight briefing area early, badge concealed beneath her coat, heart pounding like a drum. Ramirez flanked her, calm yet alert. Thomas Lane had already positioned himself discreetly, recording every moment with a hidden camera. The pilot entered, confident as ever, clipboard in hand, commanding attention with his usual swagger. His eyes scanned the room and briefly landed on Monique. A flicker of recognition passed, but he dismissed it, assuming she was just another passenger or bureaucrat, not the woman whose ID he had burned weeks ago. Monique stepped forward. Her voice was steady but sharp. Excuse me, Pilot Harris, I need a word. The room went quiet. Heads turned. Cameras clicked. The tension was palpable. Harris smirked, glancing at the press. And you are? I am FBI Special Agent Monique Harper, she said, drawing her badge and holding it aloft. The letters gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Silence. A collective intake of breath from onlookers. Harris froze. His jaw tightened. The confident smirk faltered. Color drained from his face. The arrogance that had carried him through decades of unchecked authority evaporated in an instant. Don't play games with me, he stammered, voice rising, a hint of panic creeping in. I'm not playing, Monique replied, calm but unyielding. You deliberately burned my identification at the security checkpoint. There were witnesses. Security footage. And now we are holding you accountable. Ramirez stepped forward, presenting the flash drive containing the footage. Thomas Lane, from the back of the room, discreetly ensured a live feed went to a secure federal server. The images flickered across the laptop screens. The lighter, the charred ID, the passengers' shocked expressions. The crowd gasped. Murmurs spread like wildfire. The pilot's hands shook slightly as he tried to maintain composure, but it was too late. The undeniable truth was laid bare before colleagues, press, and passengers alike. Harris attempted to speak, to deflect, but every word stumbled over the evidence. I was just, there was a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Monique's voice cut like steel. You tried to humiliate me in public. You assaulted my professional identity. That's not a misunderstanding. She turned, addressing the gathering crowd, her voice resonant and commanding. I faced this before. Every slight, every dismissal, every assumption that my competence doesn't matter. Today, we change that narrative. Today, accountability begins. A murmur of agreement swept through the passengers. Some nodded. Others whispered into phones, capturing the unfolding spectacle. The tension was thick, almost suffocating as Harris's face turned pale. Then the twist. A senior airline official entered, summoned by Thomas Lane's discreet alerts. Her expression was one of shock as she watched the footage, eyes widening. Mr. Harris, this is unacceptable, she said. You are immediately suspended pending a full investigation. This kind of behavior will not be tolerated. Harris's world crumbled. The authority he had wielded so arrogantly was stripped away in a matter of minutes. He stammered, turned, tried to retreat, but security moved in, firm. The humiliation he had once inflicted on Monique was now reflected in blinding clarity. As the crowd erupted in whispers and phone clicks, Monique felt a wave of relief and vindication wash over her. But there was no gloating, no satisfaction in revenge. This was justice, procedural, undeniable, and public. Mini cliffhanger. A passenger stepped forward, hesitating, then said quietly, I've faced the same treatment from him before. I never thought anyone would stand up. Monique's gaze softened, recognizing the ripple effect of courage. This wasn't just about her, but the climax wasn't over. Harris, desperate, lunged toward a microphone to defend himself, but the senior official stopped him cold. Cameras captured every motion, every failed attempt, every stutter. The world now saw him not as a confident pilot, but as a man confronted by the weight of his actions. Monique remained poised, standing tall, letting silence do its work. Each heartbeat in the room echoed, charged with anticipation, until finally the official declared, Federal authorities will fully investigate this incident. Mr. Harris will face appropriate consequences. For the first time in weeks, Monique exhaled fully. The tension melted slightly, replaced by the intoxicating clarity of justice pursued and achieved. Yet even in victory, she remained aware. Accountability wasn't just personal, it was societal. Every action, every courage, every voice mattered. The press cameras captured her composed, resolute posture, the weight of history and personal experience behind her gaze. Questions came, flashbulbs popped, and passengers whispered their astonishment. Monique answered succinctly, her words measured, powerful. This isn't about me. It's about ensuring respect, equality, and accountability in every space. No one should face what I faced, and if it happens, someone must stand up. As the crowd slowly dispersed, a subtle emotional spike hit her. She thought of her younger brother, Malik. She thought of every colleague, every stranger, every person who had ever been underestimated because of their skin. She realized the ripple had begun. Change didn't need to be loud. It needed to be inevitable. Mini cliffhanger to transition into resolution. But just as she turned to leave, her phone buzzed. A new message appeared. This isn't over. They're already planning their defense. Be ready, her jaw tightened. The pilot might be suspended, the evidence public, but the fight for real justice, the kind that leaves no room for repeated abuses, was only beginning. The airport had returned to its usual rhythm. Still, Monique Harper felt the shift in the air. Subtle, undeniable, like the moment after a storm when the clouds linger but the sun begins to break through. Word of the incident had spread rapidly. Airline employees whispered in break rooms. Passengers recounted what they had witnessed. and social media buzzed with clips of the confrontation. Back in her apartment, Monique finally allowed herself a moment of quiet. Ramirez sat across the table, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "You did it," he said. "I did what had to be done," Monique replied, her voice calm but charged with the lingering adrenaline. "This isn't about me, it's about accountability, about showing that behavior like his can't just be ignored." The airline had launched a formal investigation. Harris was suspended without pay, the incident officially documented, and internal disciplinary measures initiated. For once, bureaucracy aligned with justice instead of concealing wrongdoing. Monique's meticulous evidence had left the airline no room to dismiss her claims, but the impact went beyond the paperwork. Witnesses who had remained silent for years came forward, encouraged by the clarity of her courage. A flight attendant who had watched Harris belittle passengers admitted privately to Monique, "I thought it was just him, just how he is. But seeing you stand up, it gave me hope." At work, Monique's colleagues celebrated her composure and professionalism, but she remained humble. This was never about accolades or recognition. It was about sending a message that actions have consequences, and that dignity cannot be burned away. Her mother called that evening. "I saw the news," she said, voice trembling with pride. "You've always stood for what's right, Monique. I hope everyone sees that." Monique smiled, holding her badge close. The weight of months of planning, tension, and fear had transformed into a quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, but more importantly, she had sparked a ripple that others could follow. The ripple effect continued. Community groups reached out, sharing stories of racial bias in professional spaces. Some passengers publicly commended her courage. Even airline staff who had been hesitant to act began discussing protocols to prevent future incidents. Change was slowly taking root, and yet Monique remained vigilant. She knew systemic change was never instantaneous. Suspensions could end, defenses could be mounted, and prejudice could linger. But for today the balance had shifted. One act of courage had amplified countless others who might have remained silent. Mini cliffhanger. As Monique walked through the now quiet terminal days later, she noticed a young black woman at the security checkpoint, hands shaking, ID clutched tightly. Monique approached with a gentle smile, offering reassurance. "You've got this. Don't let anyone make you feel small." In that moment, Monique realized her journey had extended beyond her own confrontation. She had become a visible symbol of resilience, a reminder that standing firm, even in the face of humiliation, could protect and inspire others. The airport, once a place of dread and humiliation, now held a different energy for her. It was a space where justice had been enacted, dignity restored, and awareness awakened. Her phone buzzed with messages of thanks from witnesses, colleagues, and even strangers who had seen the footage online. Monique read each one quietly, a smile touching her lips. The fight for justice was never a solitary endeavor. It was a collective effort, and today, she had ensured the first step was visible and undeniable. The final thought lingered. Every moment of courage, no matter how small, could ignite change. And for Monique Harper, that truth had been proven beyond doubt. Monique Harper's journey wasn't just about one pilot, one airport, or one burned ID. It was a story of resilience, courage, and the quiet power of standing up for what is right, even when the world seems indifferent. Every insult, every dismissal, every assumption that she was less than had built her strength, sharpened her resolve, and prepared her for this moment of truth. The incident showed that injustice often hides in plain sight, cloaked in bureaucracy, arrogance, or casual disregard, but it also revealed that one determined person armed with evidence, integrity, and courage can turn the tide. Justice is rarely instantaneous, and change seldom comes without effort, but it begins with action. Monique's confrontation was not just personal vindication. It became a beacon. Others who had suffered silently saw her bravery and found hope. Systems that had protected wrongdoers were challenged. And a community, even if just a small corner of an airport terminal, witness the undeniable power of accountability. It's a reminder for all of us. Courage is contagious. Standing up for yourself can have a ripple effect, inspiring those around you to act, speak, and demand fairness. Silence often protects injustice, while action, thoughtful, persistent, courageous action, can break cycles that have persisted for years. So, what if this happened in your workplace, your school, or your neighborhood? What would you do if someone tried to humiliate, dismiss, or harm you simply because of who you are? Would you stay silent or find the strength to stand tall just as Monique did? The choice is ours. Every act of courage, no matter how small, can spark change. Every voice raised in truth chips away at the walls of bias and inequality. And sometimes, one person's determination is enough to remind the world that dignity, respect, and justice are not negotiable. They are rights worth fighting for. If you've ever faced injustice or witnessed someone being mistreated, share your story in the comments. Your courage might inspire someone else to take a stand. Like, share, and subscribe to remind others that standing up matters. Because every voice counts and every action can ignite change.